Prologue. The night my brother told me I was nothing but hired help, I was standing in the kitchen I had rebuilt with my own hands. It was almost midnight. The last dinner guests had gone home, the chairs were upside down on the tables, and the dishwasher was humming behind me. My feet ached inside my clogs. There was a burn on my wrist from the sauté station, flour on the sleeve of my chef's coat, and a dull throb behind my eyes from another 14-hour day. But the restaurant was alive again. 6 months earlier, it had been weeks away from closing. Now we had a waiting list on Fridays. Local food writers had started mentioning us. The new delivery program was profitable. The staff had stopped whispering about missed paychecks. For the first time since my grandfather died, the dining room felt like the place he had dreamed of building. I thought I had saved my family's legacy. Then the front door flew open, and my younger brother, Paul, staggered inside with 4 friends behind him. They were loud, overdressed, and already drunk. Paul wore a designer jacket that cost more than one of my line cooks earned in a month. He slapped the bar with his palm and demanded a bottle of our most expensive Cabernet, even though we had closed 20 minutes earlier. One of my servers, Lena, tried to explain that the register was shut down. Paul leaned across the bar and said, "Do you know who I am?" I stepped between them before he could humiliate her any further. "Go home, Paul." He turned toward me slowly. His eyes were glassy, but his smile was sharp. "Excuse me." "You heard me. You're drunk. The staff is exhausted. We're closed." His friends went quiet. For 1 second, I saw the spoiled boy he had always been, the boy who could break my things and somehow watch me get punished for upsetting him. Then he laughed. Not a warm laugh, not an embarrassed laugh, a cruel, delighted laugh as if he had been waiting years for this moment. "You still don't know, do you?" he asked. My stomach tightened. "Know what?" Paul reached over the bar, took an unopened bottle of wine, and held it up like a trophy. "You keep walking around here like this place belongs to you." "It will," I said. "Dad asked me to come home and take over." Paul looked at his friends. They smirked because they knew something I didn't. Then my brother leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Dad already transferred the restaurant to me." I stared at him. He smiled wider. "The business, the building, everything." The kitchen suddenly felt too hot. I could hear the refrigerator compressor kick on behind me. I could hear a faucet dripping near the prep sink. Every small sound became painfully clear. "That's not true," I said. "It is." He took a step toward me. "You're not the owner, Nina. You're not the heir. You're just the woman Dad brought back to fix my business for free." My mouth went dry. Paul lifted the wine bottle again. "So be a good employee," he said, "and bring us some glasses." In that moment, I believed he was lying. By the next afternoon, I would learn that my brother had told me the truth. And the people who had lied were the 2 people I had trusted enough to give up my entire life for. Chapter 1. I grew up 1 year older than Paul, and somehow 20 years more responsible. My parents called me the older sister, as if it were a job title. When Paul forgot his homework, I should have reminded him. When he lost his jacket, I should have watched it. When he broke a lamp throwing a football inside the house, I should not have made him angry enough to throw it. If there was 1 piece of cake left, Paul got it because he was younger. If there was 1 private bedroom after we moved into a smaller house, Paul got it because boys needed space. He was only 12 months younger than I was. That never seemed to matter. My childhood was made of small surrenders. I surrendered the red bicycle I had saved for because Paul suddenly liked it. I surrendered a birthday gift from my aunt because he complained that mine was better. I surrendered quiet evenings, favorite foods, privacy, and the right to be upset. "Be mature, Nina," my mother would say. "Don't be selfish," my father would add. Paul learned early that wanting something loudly enough was almost the same as owning it. I learned that love in our house came with conditions. I could be praised for being patient, useful, hardworking, and easy. I could not be difficult. I could not need too much. I could not ask why the rules were different for me. The only person who seemed to see me clearly was my grandfather. He owned a small restaurant downtown called Smith's Table. It occupied the first floor of an old brick building on Willow Street, with tall front windows and a narrow kitchen that always smelled of onions, fresh bread, and coffee. Grandpa was a cook in the truest sense of the word. He did not chase trends. He did not decorate plates with tiny flowers or talk about food as if it were a secret language. He believed a meal should make a person feel cared for. He taught me how to hold a knife when I was 8. At 10, I could make biscuits. At 12, I stood on a milk crate beside him and learned how patience changed onions from sharp and white to soft and golden. "Food tells the truth," he once said. "You can pretend to care about people, but they'll know when you feed them." In his kitchen, I was not the good daughter or the older sister. I was Nina. I had good instincts. I learned quickly. I belonged. When Grandpa died, my father inherited the restaurant. Dad was not a chef, but he was organized and charming, and for years the business did well under a talented head chef named Walter. I worked there during summers, mostly washing dishes, peeling vegetables, and helping with prep. I dreamed of running the kitchen someday, but I never said it aloud. Dreams felt fragile in my family. If Paul heard about them, he might decide they should belong to him. The day after I graduated from high school, I packed 2 suitcases and left for culinary school several states away. My mother cried at the bus station. My father told me not to forget where I came from. Paul asked whether he could have my old room. I said yes, before anyone had to tell me to. Leaving home felt like taking my first full breath. Culinary school was brutal. I loved it. I loved the heat, the pressure, the exactness. I loved that the kitchen did not care who was the favorite child. A sauce either broke or it didn't. A steak was either cooked properly or it wasn't. You could not charm an underproofed loaf into rising. I worked harder than almost everyone around me, because hard work was the one language I had been taught to speak fluently. After graduation, I moved to New York City. I started at the bottom of a prestigious restaurant where the executive chef could silence a room with one look. I chopped cases of vegetables, cleaned fish until my fingers went numb, and learned to move through a crowded line without wasting a step. Within 5 years, I had been promoted twice. I trained new cooks. I helped develop seasonal menus. I spent short stages in kitchens in France and Italy and came home with notebooks full of ideas. My life was not glamorous. My apartment was tiny, my hours were punishing, and I had scars on both hands. But every achievement was mine. Then my father called. It was a Tuesday afternoon between lunch prep and dinner service. I almost ignored the call because Dad rarely contacted me during work hours. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Nina," he said, "I need your help." Walter had retired. The replacement chef had lasted 4 months. Business was declining. Dad's blood pressure was high, his doctor wanted him to reduce stress, and the restaurant was losing its reputation. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Come home and take over. One day, all of it will be yours. It's your grandfather's restaurant. It should stay with the person who understands what it means." I closed my eyes. For years, I had trained myself not to expect anything from my parents. Yet the little girl who had stood beside Grandpa at the stove was still alive inside me. She heard those words and believed that, finally, someone had chosen her. I asked Dad whether he was certain. "Of course I'm certain," he said. "Paul has never cared about the restaurant. This is your future." My executive chef in New York offered me a raise to stay. A former mentor told me about an opening in Chicago. I had options I had once only dreamed of. I turned them down. I gave notice, packed my knives, left the city, and moved back to Riverton. I told myself I was not going backward. I was going home to claim the life my grandfather had always seen in me. Chapter 2. The first morning I opened Smith's table, I arrived before sunrise. Willow Street was empty, the storefronts dark. The old green awning above the restaurant had faded nearly gray, and one of the gold letters on the front window was peeling. I stood on the sidewalk with the key in my hand and felt something close to reverence. This building had survived recessions, floods, family fights, and changing generations. My grandfather had signed the first lease when he was 29. Later, he had bought the property one careful payment at a time. I was 31 when I stepped inside, believing I would become its third-generation owner. The dining room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. The tables were the same heavy oak tables I remembered from childhood. Framed photographs covered one wall. Grandpa beside the original lunch counter, Dad shaking hands with a mayor, generations of customers celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. I touched the back of one chair as I walked past. "I'm here," I whispered, though I was not sure whether I was speaking to the building or to my grandfather. In the changing room, I traded my coat for a clean white chef's jacket. Then I tied on my apron and entered the kitchen. It was spotless because I had stayed late the night before supervising the deep clean. Stainless steel counters shone under the fluorescent lights. Knives sat aligned on magnetic strips. Every container in the walk-in was labeled and dated. Order calmed me. I made coffee, turned on the ovens, and started a pot of chicken stock. Soon the kitchen filled with the sounds I trusted. The click of gas ignition, the scrape of a wooden spoon, the steady rhythm of my knife against the cutting board. By 6:30, the prep cooks arrived. By 7, bread was proofing, bacon was in the oven, and I was reviewing the day's reservations with the dining room manager, Alina Cruz. Alina had worked at Smith's table for 11 years. She was smart, direct, and fiercely protective of the staff. On my second day, she handed me a stack of unpaid supplier notices and said, "Your father told us everything was fine. It isn't." That was the first warning. I should have paid more attention to it. Instead, I saw a problem I knew how to solve. The breakfast service began at 7:30. At 8:15, the printer started spitting out tickets faster than the line could clear them. 2 eggs over easy, French toast, 3 omelets, biscuits and gravy, a lunch catering order due by 11. The old kitchen had bad flow. The pantry station blocked the path to the walk-in. The grill cook had to cross behind the sauté cook every time he needed butter. Half the equipment was older than some of the employees. Still, by 10, we had caught up. I moved from station to station, correcting seasoning, reorganizing plates, teaching without humiliating anyone. I had worked for chefs who believed fear made people faster. Sometimes it did. It also made them hide mistakes. I wanted a different kitchen. At noon, Dad came through the back door. He wore a pressed blue shirt and carried a paper cup of coffee, though I had already made a fresh pot. His hair had gone almost completely silver since I had last seen him. For a moment, I felt guilty for having stayed away so long. He looked around the kitchen and smiled. This place hasn't run this smoothly in years. Pride warmed me more than it should have. "We still have a lot to fix," I said. "The lunch menu is too big. Food costs are inconsistent. The point-of-sale system belongs in a museum." Dad laughed. "That's why you're here." He did not check the line or inspect the books. He sat at a corner table, drank his coffee, and watched me work as if I were proof that his problems had finally ended. I did not resent him, not then. I respected him. I believed he was still the owner and that I was learning the business before taking responsibility for it. When he corrected me, I listened. When he made decisions I disagreed with, I reminded myself that the transfer would happen in time. There was no written agreement. I had asked once, before leaving New York, whether we should put our plan on paper. Dad had sounded wounded. Since when does a father need a contract with his daughter? I apologized. That afternoon, he stopped beside the pass while I plated 2 orders of roast chicken. "Your mother wants to know if you're coming tomorrow," he said. "For what?" "The barbecue, our anniversary." I had forgotten, 40 years of marriage. "I'll be there. No excuses about work. I'll finish the prep before I leave. Marcus and Tasha can handle dinner." Dad nodded approvingly. "That's my girl." 3 words, "That's my girl." I carried them with me through the dinner rush. At 10:30 that night, after the last pan was washed, I stood alone in the dining room and looked at the photographs on the wall. One day I thought, this will be mine. I did not mean the money or the property. I meant the responsibility, the history, the right to protect what my grandfather had built. I had no idea that the legal papers had already been signed. I had no idea that the building I was lovingly restoring belonged to Paul. Chapter 3. My parents' backyard looked like a photograph from a family magazine. White tablecloths covered rented tables beneath strings of lights. My mother had arranged flowers in mason jars. Dad stood at the grill wearing an apron that said "still hot after 40 years, a gift from one of his friends. I arrived carrying 2 trays of food from the restaurant, herb-roasted vegetables, and a lemon cake with raspberry filling. Mom kissed my cheek and immediately asked whether I had remembered Paul's favorite beer. I brought wine, I said. Oh, well, your father probably bought beer. Of course he had. Paul arrived 40 minutes late in a black sports car that drew every eye in the yard. He got out wearing sunglasses even though the sun was setting. His watch flashed when he lifted a hand in greeting. He looked rested, tanned, and completely untouched by responsibility. Nice car, I said when he finally wandered over. He smiled. You like it? Is it yours? For now. That answer should have raised questions. Instead, I assumed he was leasing it with money he did not have, which seemed perfectly consistent with the brother I knew. During dinner, my parents' friends asked about New York and Europe. For once, I was not invisible. They wanted to know why I had come back, what I planned to change, and whether the restaurant would still serve my grandfather's pot roast. Always, I said, but I want to make the menu smaller and better. We'll keep the dishes people love, add seasonal specials, improve the wine list, and start online ordering. The dining room needs updating, but I don't want to erase its history. Dad nodded through every word. She has a real plan, he told the table. Nina is going to save that place. My mother squeezed my arm. We don't know what we'd do without her. I felt seen. I hate admitting how much that mattered. Across the table, Paul gave a quiet laugh. I looked at him. What's funny? Nothing. You've been smirking for 5 minutes. He leaned back in his chair, turning his glass by the stem. I just enjoy watching you work so hard at everything. There was something in his tone I could not name. At least I work, I said. Mom shot me a warning look. One of Dad's oldest friends, Mr. Henderson, tried to lighten the mood. What are you doing these days, Paul? He asked. Your father says you're in business. Paul's smile returned. I own a company. What kind? A private company. Mr. Henderson laughed politely. That covers a lot of territory. Before Paul could answer, Dad stood and announced that it was time to cut the cake. The conversation shifted. Everyone applauded. Mom posed with the knife while Dad put an arm around her waist. I looked from my father to my brother. Dad was avoiding my eyes. I told myself he was embarrassed by Paul's exaggeration. It was not the first time my father had redirected a conversation to protect him. As children, Paul could bring home a failing grade, and Dad would explain that the teacher did not understand him. He could wreck a car, and Dad would blame the weather. He could quit a job after 2 weeks, and Mom would say the manager had been disrespectful. My parents did not merely rescue Paul from consequences. They built a wall between him and reality. Still, I did not imagine the truth. After dessert, I carried empty plates into the kitchen. Mom followed me. You shouldn't criticize your brother in front of people, she said. He criticized me first. He was teasing. He's 30 years old. And you're the older sister. There it was, the old sentence, the family law that never expired. I set a plate in the sink more sharply than necessary. By 1 year, Mom. She sighed as if I were exhausting her. Why does everything have to become a competition with you? I stared at her. For most of my life, I had stepped aside. Somehow, the moment I stopped, I became competitive. I wanted to ask where Paul's money came from. I wanted to ask what company he owned. I wanted to ask why Dad had looked so nervous. But outside, someone called for a family photograph. Mom straightened her blouse and smiled. Come on, your father is waiting. In the photograph, Paul stood between my parents. I stood beside my mother, 1 step from the edge. Chapter 4. The restaurant did not need a few improvements. It needed to be rescued from years of neglect. The menu had 73 items. We stocked ingredients for dishes that sold twice a month. Suppliers charged us inconsistent prices because no one reviewed the invoices. The website listed a phone number that had been disconnected 3 years earlier. The dining room carpet had a dark path worn from the front door to the kitchen. I began with the books. Dad resisted at first. You're a chef, he said. Let me worry about the business side. But the business side was bleeding into the kitchen. We were wasting food. Overtime was uncontrolled. Some weeks, the restaurant looked busy and still lost money. I spent mornings cooking and afternoons building spreadsheets. At night, I sat at the desk in my small apartment, comparing supplier contracts until the numbers blurred. I reduced the menu from 73 items to 32. Customers complained for 2 weeks. Then they noticed that the food came out faster and tasted better. I kept Grandpa's pot roast, his chicken soup, and the apple pie recipe he had never written down because he measured cinnamon in his palm. Around those dishes, I built a modern American menu that fit the town. Braised short ribs, roast chicken with lemon pan sauce, seasonal pastas, crisp salads, and a burger made with local beef. I found a nearby farm willing to supply produce at a fair price. I renegotiated our meat contract. I convinced a local bakery to create a custom dinner roll after our oven failed during a holiday weekend. I designed a delivery menu that traveled well instead of sending soggy fries across town and hoping no one complained. I replaced the old register system with tablets. I photographed dishes for social media. I answered negative reviews personally and invited disappointed customers to return. The work consumed me. For 3 months, I slept 5 hours on a good night. I lost weight because I tasted food all day and forgot to eat a meal. My hands cracked from soap and sanitizer. Some mornings, I sat in my car for 60 seconds before going inside because I needed 1 minute in which nobody needed anything from me. Then I opened the door and became strong again. The staff began to believe. Marcus, my sous chef, had worked under Walter and planned to leave before I arrived. He stayed. Tasha, our pastry cook, created a maple bread pudding that became one of our most popular desserts. Elena reorganized the front of house and trained servers to describe the menu instead of simply writing down orders. We became a team. Dad came in several times a week, usually during the calm part of the afternoon. He praised the full reservation book. He shook hands with customers. He told anyone who would listen that his daughter had trained in New York. One afternoon, he stood in the kitchen while I reviewed food costs. "I knew you could do it," he said. "We're not safe yet." "We will be." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "You're our hope, Nina. With you here, your grandfather's restaurant won't fail." I looked up at him. "Dad, when should we talk about the ownership transition?" His hand left my shoulder. "Why are you worried about that now?" "I'm not worried. I just think we should have a timeline." "You've been here 3 months." "I know. Let's get through the first year, then we'll sit down with the attorney." His answer sounded reasonable. I nodded. "Okay." He smiled again, but it did not reach his eyes. That night, I stayed until almost 1 in the morning, rebuilding the catering budget. While I worked, Paul posted photographs from a nightclub 2 towns away. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot because Paul had blocked me months earlier after an argument about money. In the picture, he was holding a bottle of champagne over a table crowded with strangers. I looked at the restaurant's bank balance on my computer screen, then at the photograph on my phone. For the first time, the 2 things seemed connected. I pushed the thought away. Chapter 5. Paul and I had never been close, but distance had made our relationship easier. While I lived in New York, I saw him at holidays and occasional family gatherings. In small doses, he could be charming. He told funny stories. He remembered people's favorite drinks. He knew how to make a room feel brighter as long as no one expected anything from him. Responsibility changed him. The moment someone asked him to contribute, his charm disappeared. He had tried college twice and left both times. He had worked for a real estate agency, a car dealership, and one of Dad's friends. Every job ended with the same story. The boss was jealous, the hours were unreasonable, the company was badly managed. My parents accepted each explanation. When I came home, Paul was supposedly developing investments. No one could explain what that meant. He appeared at the restaurant occasionally, never to help. He came for free meals, sat at the bar, and expected the staff to treat him like royalty. The first time he signed a check with no payment, I called Dad. "Paul says family doesn't pay," I said. Dad hesitated. "He's right. Your grandfather never charged immediate family." Grandpa's family didn't order $200 in steak and bourbon. "It's not worth fighting about." To Dad, Peace always meant giving Paul what he wanted. A week later, I heard that my brother had rented a private room at a club for his birthday. The following month, someone mentioned a weekend in Miami. Then came the sports car. I asked Mom where the money was coming from. Paul is doing well, she said. At what? He has opportunities. What opportunities? She became defensive. Why can't you be happy for him? I was tired that day. The dinner service had been difficult, and a refrigeration repair had cost more than expected. Because none of this makes sense, I said. Dad told me the family was in financial trouble. The restaurant can barely afford equipment, but Paul is traveling and buying designer clothes. Your brother is an adult. So am I, yet everyone expects me to explain every decision I make. Mom lowered her voice. Don't start, Nina. That phrase could still turn me into a child. I took the concern to Dad. We were in his home office, where framed certificates and old restaurant photographs covered the walls. I told him I was worried Paul might be in debt. Dad's expression hardened. His finances are none of your business. If he's borrowing from you while the restaurant is struggling, it becomes my business. Why would you assume I'm giving him money? Because you've always given him money. The silence after that sentence was heavy. Dad stood. You came home to run the kitchen, not to interrogate this family. I came home to take over the restaurant. In time. And if Paul's spending threatens it. It doesn't. His answer was fast, too fast. I looked at him, waiting for more. He opened the office door. Focus on your own work, Nina. I left angry, but beneath the anger was something more painful. I had spent my childhood being told that Paul's behavior was not mine to question, even when I was forced to clean up after him. Now I was an adult, and the same rule remained. Paul could take. I could work. Paul could be protected. I could be useful. At the time, I believed this was merely the old unfairness wearing new clothes. I did not yet understand that my parents had built their entire rescue plan around it. Chapter 6. By late autumn, Smith's table was profitable again. Not wildly profitable, not enough to erase years of debt. But for the first time in a long time, revenue was higher than expenses, suppliers were being paid on schedule, and the staff no longer watched the calendar with fear. I should have been proud. Mostly, I was tired. My life narrowed to the restaurant and the small apartment I rented above a pharmacy 6 blocks away. I woke before dawn, drank coffee standing at my kitchen counter, and arrived while the streetlights were still on. I returned home smelling of smoke, garlic, and fryer oil. Some nights, I fell asleep before I could remove my socks. Friends from New York called less often because I was always working. A man I had dated casually before leaving stopped texting after I canceled our 3rd planned visit. My suitcase from the move remained half unpacked in the closet. I told myself sacrifice was temporary. Once the restaurant was secure, I would hire another manager. Once Dad transferred ownership, I would have the authority to take out a proper renovation loan. Once the debt was under control, I would create a schedule that did not require me to live in the kitchen. Everything good was waiting on the other side of one more difficult month. The staff noticed my exhaustion before my family did. One afternoon, Alina placed a bowl of soup in front of me while I sat at the office computer. I didn't order this, I said. You also didn't eat breakfast. I tasted 3 sauces. That is not breakfast. I smiled despite myself. You sound like my grandmother. Your grandmother was probably right. She leaned against the doorframe. Take Sunday off. I can't. You have 2 sous chefs. Marcus's daughter has a recital. Tasha can handle brunch. And if something goes wrong, then something goes wrong. The building will still be standing Monday. I looked around the office at the invoices, schedules, and repair estimates. I wanted to tell Alina that I did not know who I was when I was not proving my value. In my family, usefulness had always been the safest form of love. If I stopped carrying the weight, I feared someone would remember I could be replaced. Instead, I said, after the holidays. She gave me a look that said she did not believe me. Neither did I. During those months, Paul became a shadow at the edge of my life. I heard about him without seeing him. A bartender mentioned his unpaid tab. A former classmate said he had been telling people he owned commercial property downtown. Someone else said he was looking at opening a luxury lounge. Whenever I asked my parents, they shut the conversation down. Eventually, I stopped asking. That was exactly what they wanted. I focused on the Christmas menu, the staff party, and a catering contract with the local hospital. I replaced a failing freezer using a short-term loan Dad approved. I spent 3 days developing a holiday takeout package that sold out in 6 hours. On Christmas Eve, after the final order was collected, the staff gathered in the dining room. We ate leftover pie from paper plates and exchanged small gifts. Marcus gave me a framed copy of our first positive newspaper review. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, "Smith's table finds its heart again." I had to blink quickly before anyone noticed the tears in my eyes. "You did that," Marcus said. "No, we did." The team applauded. For one brief moment, I felt surrounded by the family I had wanted all my life. People who worked beside me, respected me, and did not need me to become smaller so they could feel important. Then Dad arrived to collect the restaurant's weekly deposit. He hugged everyone and accepted congratulations. As I handed him the bank bag, I said, "The holiday numbers are strong. We should leave part of this in the operating account for January repairs." "I'll handle it. I already marked the amount in the report." He tucked the bag under his arm. I said, "I'll handle it, Nina." His tone surprised me. The room had gone quiet. Dad immediately softened. "You've done enough tonight, go home." I watched him leave with the money I had helped earn. For the first time, I wondered why I still had no direct access to the primary business account. The thought stayed with me for 2 days. Then a pipe burst in the kitchen, and I forgot to ask. Chapter 7. The confrontation happened on a Thursday in February. We had survived Valentine's Day, a snowstorm, and a week when 3 employees came down with the flu. By Thursday evening, the dining room was finally calm. At 10 o'clock, the final couple paid their check. At 10:15, Elena locked the front door. The kitchen crew began cleaning the line. I was reviewing the next morning's prep list when someone pounded on the glass. Lena looked through the front window and frowned. "It's your brother." Paul stood outside with 4 people I did not recognize. One woman was laughing so hard she had to hold his arm. A man behind them waved an empty flask at the window. "Don't open it," I said. Then Paul took out his phone and called Dad. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. "Let him in," Dad said. "We're closed. He has friends visiting. The kitchen is shut down. Give them drinks, put something simple together." I looked through the glass at my brother. He smiled and lifted his phone. That smile made something inside me snap. "No," I said. Dad was silent. "I have employees who have been here since noon," I continued. "They have families. Paul can go to a bar that's open. Nina, do not create a scene." He created the scene. Dad exhaled slowly. "Just take care of it." Then he hung up. I should have sent Paul away. Instead, old training took over. Keep the peace. Be mature. Do not embarrass the family. I unlocked the door. Paul entered, as if the restaurant had opened for him personally. "There she is," he announced. "My hardworking sister." His friends laughed. "We can serve 1 round," I said. "No food, then you leave." Paul dropped into a bar chair. "Bring the silver oak." "That bottle is $240. So you're paying for it." His face changed. "Put it on my account." "You don't have an account." He looked at Lena. "Get the wine." "She works for me," I said. Paul turned toward me. The room seemed to tighten around us. "And who do you work for?" he asked. "I run this restaurant." "That's not what I asked." "You're drunk." "Maybe, but I still know whose name is on the deed." His friends had stopped laughing. I felt the first cold movement of fear beneath my ribs. "What are you talking about?" Paul stood. He was unsteady, but the pleasure in his expression was unmistakable. "Dad gave me the restaurant." "No, he didn't." He did. He asked me to come home and take over. Exactly. Paul spread his hands. He needed someone competent to repair the place. I needed the place to be worth something. My face went numb. You're lying. Why would I lie? Because you've spent your entire life taking things that belong to me. His eyes hardened. Nothing here belongs to you. He reached across the bar and grabbed the bottle he wanted. I caught his wrist. For a second, we stood frozen. Then Paul leaned close enough for me to smell the alcohol on his breath. Dad transferred the business before you left New York, he whispered. The building, too. You came home after it was already mine. My grip loosened. He pulled the bottle free. You're an employee, Nina. A very dedicated employee, apparently, but still an employee. Lena looked at me with horror. Elena had come from the office and was standing near the dining room entrance. No one moved. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw him out. I wanted to call my father and force him to deny every word in front of everyone. Instead, I heard myself say, Lena, please go home. I can stay, she said softly. No, all of you clock out. I'll finish closing. Elena did not move. I met her eyes. Please. One by one, the employees left. I gave Paul and his friends the wine because I needed them out without a fight. They drank half the bottle, took photographs behind the bar, and left laughing. Paul paused at the door. You should be nicer to the owner, he said. When the lock clicked behind him, I stood in the empty dining room and stared at the glass he had used. My hands began to shake. I carried the glasses to the sink. One slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. I crouched to pick up the pieces and cut my thumb. Blood ran down my hand, bright against the white tile. I did not feel it. All I could hear was my brother's voice. You came home after it was already mine. Chapter 8. I called Dad at 7 the next morning. He answered on the 5th ring. What did Paul mean? I asked. There was a pause. Then Dad gave a tired laugh. Good morning to you too. Did you transfer the restaurant to him? Paul was drunk. That isn't an answer. He gets confused when he drinks. Did you transfer the business or the building to Paul? Dad sighed. No, Nina, not the way he said. The way he said. I heard the phrase, but I wanted relief so badly that I ignored it. So he lied. He misunderstood some family planning. What family planning? Nothing you need to worry about. Dad, he walked into the restaurant, humiliated my staff, and told me I was working for him. I'll talk to him. Tell me the truth. The restaurant will be yours one day, he said. I promised you that. His voice softened. It was the voice he used when I was a child and had finally stopped crying. You know what this place means to me, I said. Of course I do. You would tell me if something had changed. Yes. It was a direct lie. I believed him because I needed my father to be the man I thought he was. For the rest of the day, I worked mechanically. I checked deliveries, prepared sauces, and corrected a schedule. I apologized to the staff for Paul's behavior without explaining what he had said. Elena waited until we were alone. Do you believe your father? The question irritated me because it touched the fear I was trying to bury. He said Paul misunderstood. That isn't what I asked. I turned away. I have work to do. She lowered her voice. Nina, I've been here 11 years. Your father avoids paperwork he doesn't want people to see. Before you came home, there were meetings with a lawyer. Paul came in twice to sign documents. I looked at her. When? Last spring. I had moved home in August. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know what the documents were, and your father was still running the business. My pulse began to race. I went to the office and opened the filing cabinets. Tax records, employee forms, supplier agreements, insurance policies. No deed, no transfer documents, no ownership agreement. I checked the business license, framed near the office door. Owner, Paul Smith. Relief came first. My father was Paul Smith. Then I remembered that my brother was Paul Smith Jr., though he rarely used the suffix. I took the frame off the wall. The license listed no middle initial, no date of birth, nothing that proved which Paul Smith it referred to. I called Dad again. He did not answer. I called Mom. She sent the call to voicemail. At lunch, I told Marcus I had an appointment and left the restaurant for 2 hours. I drove to the county administration building and requested property records for the address on Willow Street. The clerk typed on her computer, printed 2 pages, and slid them beneath the glass. The current owner was listed as Paul Andrew Smith. My father's middle name was Edward. My brother's middle name was Andrew. The transfer date was May 14. 3 months before my father called me in New York. I stared at the page so long that the clerk asked whether I was all right. "I'm fine," I said automatically. The good daughter's answer. I folded the document, put it in my bag, and walked outside. The winter air cut through my coat. Cars moved past. A woman pushed a stroller along the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, a truck was backing up, beeping steadily. The world continued, as if mine had not just split open. I called a local attorney named Rebecca Sloan. She had once handled a lease dispute for one of our suppliers and agreed to meet me that afternoon. I brought the property record, the business license, and every document I could find. Rebecca read in silence. Finally, she looked at me over the top of her glasses. "The building was transferred to your brother last May," she said. "The operating company was transferred 2 weeks later. Could it be temporary?" "Legally, he owns both. My father told me the restaurant was his. He may still be managing it informally, but he is not the owner. He promised it to me." "Was that promise in writing?" I shook my head. "Did you invest your own money?" "Not directly. I left my job. I moved. I worked for less than half my New York salary. I rebuilt the menu, negotiated contracts, created the delivery system." My voice broke. Rebecca's expression softened. "I'm sorry." I hated those words because they made the truth official. "So I have nothing. You have your wages and whatever rights exist under your employment agreement." "I don't have an employment agreement." She was quiet. I laughed once, a small broken sound. "Of course I don't." My father had asked why a parent needed a contract with his daughter. Now I understood. A contract would have protected me. Trust had protected them. Chapter 9. Rebecca helped me obtain copies of the full transfer records. The documents were clean, deliberate, legal. My father had not made a hurried decision during a medical crisis. He and my mother had met with an attorney several times. The business had been transferred to Paul for a nominal amount as part of what the papers called an early succession plan. The building followed. There was even a clause allowing my parents to continue receiving income from the restaurant for several years. My name appeared nowhere. I sat in Rebecca's office, reading the same page again and again. May 14, May 28, June 3. Dates from a life I had been living in New York. At that time, I had been working toward a promotion. I had been apartment hunting. I had been planning a trip to Spain with 2 friends. My parents had already given Paul the restaurant. Then, when the business continued to fail under their management, they called me. Not as an heir. As a solution. Every compliment rearranged itself in my memory. "You're our hope, Nina. We don't know what we'd do without you. Your grandfather's restaurant won't fail with you here." They had praised me because praise was cheaper than paying a qualified chef. They had let me work 14-hour days because my exhaustion increased the value of Paul's property. I thought of the sports car, the clubs, the trips, the weekly deposits Dad collected. "Can Paul withdraw money from the business?" I asked. "As the owner, yes, subject to the company structure and any lending restrictions. He's been spending constantly." "Then you need to protect yourself. Do not personally guarantee any debts. Do not sign documents you haven't reviewed." I looked at her. What should I do about the restaurant? That is not only a legal question. No, it's a family question. Rebecca closed the folder. "From what you've told me, your family already answered it." I drove to my parents' house with the papers on the passenger seat. During the 20-minute trip, I rehearsed what I would say. I imagined explanations that might make the betrayal less complete. Maybe Paul's name was on the property to protect it from creditors. Maybe Dad planned a second transfer. Maybe there was a trust I did not understand. Hope is stubborn. Even after the evidence, some part of me kept trying to save them from what they had done. Mom opened the door wearing gardening gloves. "Nina, why aren't you at the restaurant? I need to talk to you and Dad." She saw the folder in my hand and went pale. That was the moment I knew. There was no innocent explanation. Dad was in the living room watching television. I placed the documents on the coffee table. "What is this?" I asked. He looked at the top page and did not touch it. "Where did you get those?" "Does it matter?" "You went behind my back." The accusation was so absurd that I almost could not speak. "You transferred the restaurant to Paul before you asked me to come home." Mom sat down slowly. Dad picked up the remote and turned off the television. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." "It was complicated." "The documents are not complicated. Paul owns the business and the building." "There were financial reasons." "What reasons?" Dad stood and walked toward the window. "The restaurant was in trouble." "I know, that's why I came home." "We had debt. Walter retired. Customers were leaving. I couldn't manage the kitchen and my health was getting worse." "So you gave everything to Paul?" "He is our son." "I am your daughter." Mom flinched. Dad rubbed a hand across his face. "Paul needed stability." I stared at him, and I didn't. "You had a career. You've always been capable." The words landed like stones. Because I was capable, I received nothing. Because Paul was irresponsible, he received a building. Dad continued. "We believed ownership might force him to grow up." "Did it?" Neither of them answered. I pointed to the papers. "You gave him the restaurant, then you called me because you knew he couldn't run it." "We needed you," Mom said. "No, you used me." "That is not fair." "What part is unfair? Did you tell me Paul owned it?" "No, but..." "Did Dad promise it would be mine?" Mom looked down. I turned to my father. "You lied to me." "I told you it would be yours one day." "How? Paul owns it. He could transfer it later." I laughed. "Did he agree to that?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Paul is family." "That is not an answer." "We had no choice," he said suddenly, raising his voice. "Do you understand? No choice. The restaurant was dying. I could not afford another chef with your experience. Paul would never work the hours. You were the only person who could save it." The room became completely still. There it was. Not an apology, not even a denial. The truth. They had known exactly what they were doing. Chapter 10. "You had a choice," I said. Dad shook his head. "You don't understand the pressure I was under." "I understand perfectly. You wanted Paul to own the restaurant, but you needed me to make it successful. It belongs to the family." "No, it belongs to Paul." "Paul is family." "So am I." The words tore out of me so loudly that my throat hurt. For 31 years, I had swallowed that sentence. I had swallowed it when Paul took my room, when he ruined my birthday, when my parents paid his debts but told me culinary school was too expensive, when I worked nights to cover tuition while they bought him another car. So am I. Mom began to cry. I might once have stopped to comfort her. That day, I did not. Dad looked at me with anger instead of shame. "You left," he said. "I went to school. You built a life somewhere else. Because there was no room for me here. We were proud of you. You were proud of me when my success became useful to you." "That's cruel." "No, cruel was letting me give up my career for a promise you had already made impossible." Mom wiped her face. "We thought once the restaurant was stable, everything could be worked out." "What does that mean?" "Paul could keep the property, and you could continue managing the restaurant." I stared at her. "You expected me to run his business for the rest of my life. You would be paid." I was earning more than twice as much in New York. "But this is home." "No, Mom. Home is where people don't trick you into sacrificing your future." Dad stepped closer to the coffee table. "Lower your voice." The command was automatic. I was the difficult daughter again, the emotional woman creating a problem by naming it. I lowered my voice, but not because he told me to. I wanted every word to be clear. You transferred a valuable property to a man who has never finished anything. Then you brought me back to increase its value. You watched me destroy my health while Paul spent money from the business. You don't know that, Dad said. Where did the money for the car come from? Silence. The Miami trip. Mom looked toward Dad. The clubs, the clothes, the champagne. Dad's face turned red. Paul took distributions he was legally entitled to take. I felt sick. How much? That's private. How much? Enough, Mom whispered. I thought of the freezer loan, the broken pipe, the nights I had stayed late searching for another $1,000 in savings. Money was leaving the restaurant as fast as I could earn it. I sat down because my knees had weakened. Why him? I asked. It was the smallest question and the deepest wound. Dad looked away. Mom answered. He needs us more. I nodded slowly. There it was, the family philosophy in 5 words. Paul needed more, so he received more. I was strong, so I could be hurt. I was capable, so I could be deprived. I was loyal, so I could be deceived. I needed parents, I said. You just never thought that counted. Mom covered her mouth. Dad's expression shifted for the first time. For a moment, I saw regret. Then he said, Don't throw away your grandfather's legacy because your feelings are hurt. Something inside me went quiet. My feelings are hurt. As if this were a forgotten birthday, as if I were sulking over a gift. I stood, gathered the papers, and put them back in the folder. What are you doing? Dad asked. Leaving. We haven't finished this conversation. I have. You need to be at the restaurant tomorrow. I looked at him. Even now, after everything, he expected me to report for work. Find another chef. His face changed. Nina, be reasonable. I was reasonable for 31 years. I walked to the door. Mom followed me into the hallway. Please don't do anything impulsive. I put on my coat. You had 9 months to think about what you were doing, I said. Don't call my reaction impulsive. Then I left the house, where I had spent my childhood learning how little space I was allowed to occupy. Chapter 11. I returned to Smith's table after the dinner rush. The staff knew something was wrong the moment they saw me. My face felt stiff, as though I had been holding the same expression for hours. Marcus followed me into the office. What happened? I closed the door. Paul owns the restaurant. He stared at me. The business and the building. Dad transferred everything before I came home. Marcus sat down without being asked. That's why your brother said. Yes. And your father knew. You thought it would be yours. Yes. The word nearly broke me. I told him the rest. Not every childhood wound, but enough. The promise, the records, the confrontation, the money Paul had taken. Marcus swore under his breath. What are you going to do? I'm resigning. When? Now. The answer frightened me as soon as I said it. I had no plan. My savings were smaller than when I left New York. My apartment lease had 8 months remaining. The restaurant was not mine, but it had become the center of my life. Still, I knew that if I stayed even 1 more week, my parents would interpret my presence as forgiveness. I typed a resignation letter. It was 4 sentences long. I stated that I was leaving effective immediately, because the ownership arrangement had been deliberately concealed from me, and because I could no longer act in the best interest of owners who had misrepresented my future with the company. Then I emailed it to Dad and Paul. Paul responded first. You can't quit without notice. I stared at the message and almost laughed. I had no contract, no ownership stake, no protection. For once, their carelessness worked in my favor. Dad called 3 times. I did not answer. I gathered my knives, notebooks, and the framed newspaper review Marcus had given me. I left recipes that belonged to the restaurant, but I took the personal menu development notes I had created before returning home. Then I called a staff meeting. They stood in the dining room in aprons and server uniforms, tired from another long night. I told them the truth, without asking anyone to choose sides. I believed I was rebuilding a restaurant I would eventually own, I said. I learned today that Paul has owned it since before I arrived. I cannot continue under those circumstances. Lena began to cry. Elena crossed her arms. What happens to us? I don't know. That answer hurt more than any other. These people had trusted me. I had promised stability. Now I was leaving them with Paul. I am sorry, I said. I wish I could protect all of you from this. Marcus stood. You already did more than anyone else. One by one, they hugged me. When the room emptied, I walked through the kitchen alone. I touched the edge of the pass where I had plated thousands of meals. I checked the stove knobs out of habit. I opened the walk-in, saw every container labeled in my handwriting, and had to grip the doorframe. I had poured myself into that place. Leaving felt like tearing away part of my own body. At the back door, I turned off the lights. The kitchen disappeared into darkness. For the first time since coming home, I did not know what morning would ask of me. Chapter 12. The next morning, I woke at 4:45 without an alarm. For several seconds, I did not understand why the room felt wrong. Then I realized I did not have to go to the restaurant. I lay still in the dark. Freedom should have felt light. Instead, it felt like falling. My phone was full of messages. Dad said I was behaving irresponsibly. Mom asked me to think about the family. Paul wrote that if the restaurant lost money because of my tantrum, he would hold me responsible. I turned the phone face down. My apartment looked temporary because I had treated it that way. Unpacked boxes stood against the wall. The refrigerator held mustard, eggs, and half a container of staff meal. I had sacrificed a real home because I believed I was building something permanent elsewhere. I made coffee and sat on the floor beside the window. Across the rooftops, the sky slowly changed from black to gray. I remembered every late night, every missed call from friends, every time Dad had collected the deposits, every photograph of Paul spending money while I searched invoices for places to save $50. Anger came in waves, but beneath it was grief. I had not only lost a restaurant. I had lost the parents I thought I might finally have. Around noon, my former executive chef in New York called. Elena had contacted him without telling me. There's an opening here, he said. Not your old position, better come back. The offer was generous. It was safe. I could leave Riverton within weeks and rebuild the life I had abandoned. I thanked him and asked for 2 days to decide. That evening, I walked downtown. Smith's table stood across the street, glowing beneath the old awning. Through the windows, I could see a nearly empty dining room. Paul sat at the bar while a new cook moved frantically behind the pass. Then I noticed the vacant storefront opposite the restaurant. It had once been a cafe. A handwritten sign in the window read "For lease." I stood in the cold for a long time. Leaving town would prove I could survive without my family. Staying could prove something more important. My work had never belonged to them. Chapter 13. The vacant cafe was smaller than Smith's table and in worse condition than it appeared from outside. The floor needed refinishing. The ventilation system required repairs. The kitchen had one functioning oven and a sink that groaned whenever the water ran. I loved it immediately. The landlord, Mrs. Patel, recognized me. "You're the chef from across the street," she said. I was. She studied me for a moment, then nodded as if she had heard the rest of the story already. In a small town, secrets traveled faster than delivery orders. I showed her a business plan 3 days later. I used my remaining savings, a small business loan, and an investment from Elena, who insisted on becoming a minority partner instead of merely an employee. Mrs. Patel agreed to reduced rent for the first 4 months in exchange for a longer lease. It was still a risk large enough to terrify me. I took it. We called the restaurant Nina's Kitchen. Not because I wanted my name on a sign, but because Elena said I had spent long enough building things other people claimed. When word spread, Dad called. "You cannot open across the street," he said. "I signed the lease yesterday." "That is a direct attack on your brother. It is a restaurant in an available building. You could go anywhere. So could Paul." Dad lowered his voice. "Think about what this will do to us." I looked around the dusty space, where Marcus was measuring for a prep table. For once, I'm thinking about what happens to me. The staff made their own choices. I did not recruit anyone secretly. I told them I could not promise high salaries or immediate success. I could only promise honesty, shared standards, and ownership that would not be hidden from them. Marcus joined as head chef. Alina became general manager and partner. Tasha came to run pastry. Lena and 5 other employees resigned from Smith's table within 2 weeks. Paul accused me of stealing them. You can't steal people, I told him. They aren't property. We renovated on a brutal schedule. We scrubbed walls, repaired equipment, painted the dining room, and built simple wooden tables with help from Marcus's brother. I developed a menu small enough for the kitchen and strong enough to make people curious. The night before opening, I stood beneath our new sign. Nina's Kitchen. For years, my name had been attached to responsibility but never authority. Now it was attached to both. On opening morning, a line formed before the doors unlocked. Some customers came because they loved my food. Others came because they had heard the family scandal. I did not care why they entered. I cared what they felt when they left. We served roast chicken with crisp potatoes, mushroom pasta, short ribs, warm rolls, and Tasha's maple bread pudding. We made mistakes. The ticket printer jammed. One table waited too long. I overcooked an entire tray of carrots because I was answering a supplier call. But the dining room was full. At the end of the night, we gathered in the tiny kitchen. No one had the energy to celebrate properly. Alina opened a bottle of inexpensive sparkling wine and poured it into water glasses. To owning your work, she said. I looked through the front window at Smith's table across the street. Its dining room was almost empty. I felt no triumph. Not yet. Only the quiet certainty that I had finally stopped asking permission to build my own life. Chapter 14. Nina's Kitchen grew faster than any projection in my business plan. Within a month, reservations filled the weekends. Within 3 months, we added lunch service. A regional magazine published a review praising the restaurant's warmth, discipline, and food that tastes like someone kept a promise. That line stayed with me. Across the street, Smith's table began to collapse. Paul treated the business like a bank account. He raised prices, reduced portions, and replaced experienced employees with cheaper workers who received almost no training. He removed several of Grandpa's dishes because they required too much prep, then spent money installing a glossy bar that did not fit the town or the dining room. Dad tried to step back in, but Paul reminded him who legally owned the business. For once, the weapon my parents had handed him turned in their direction. Customers complained. Suppliers demanded payment in advance. The online reviews became painful to read. My mother blamed me. If you hadn't taken the staff, this wouldn't be happening, she said during one of her calls. The staff left because Paul mistreated them. You made it easy. I gave them jobs. You're enjoying this. I looked around my kitchen. Marcus was teaching a young cook how to make pan sauce. Tasha was laughing with Lena near the dessert station. Everyone was busy, but no one looked afraid. No, I said. I'm enjoying what I built. Those are not the same thing. Paul lasted 8 months. By the end, Smith's table was open only 4 days a week. The bank filed notices. The utilities threatened shutoff. The building that my grandfather had spent decades paying for was tied to business debts Paul had taken on after becoming owner. Dad came to Nina's Kitchen twice and asked me to return. The first time, he offered me my old job with a higher salary. The second time, he said Paul might be willing to give me 10% of the business. I said no both times. What do you want? Dad finally demanded. The chance you already gave away. You're punishing us. I'm refusing to rescue you from the same decision again. 6 weeks later, Smith's table closed. The old sign remained above the door, but the windows went dark. I stood inside my own crowded restaurant and watched my childhood disappear across the street. I cried in the storage room, where no one could see me. The failure was not mine, but the grief still was. Chapter 15. My family responded to the closure as if I had personally locked the doors. Paul sent messages calling me a thief and a traitor. Dad told relatives that I had destroyed a 3-generation business out of spite. Mom said she could not understand how a daughter could humiliate her parents publicly. No one mentioned the hidden transfer. No one mentioned the money Paul had taken. No one mentioned the months I had spent saving the restaurant before I learned it was his. Their version was simpler. Nina became successful. Nina opened nearby. Nina caused the failure. For the first time, I did not defend myself to everyone. People who truly wanted the truth asked. I told them. People who preferred my parents' story were free to keep it. That boundary felt unnatural at first. I had spent my life explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. Now I put that energy into work. Nina's kitchen became profitable enough to repay part of the startup loan early. We added health benefits for full-time employees. I reduced my own schedule to 1 full day off each week. On my first free Sunday, I unpacked the boxes in my apartment. It was a small act, but it felt like declaring that my life was no longer temporary. Then Rebecca called. The bank was preparing to sell the old restaurant building. Paul could not save it. My parents could not save it. The property that had been handed to him was about to leave the family entirely. I asked for the sale documents. This time, I read every page. Chapter 16. Purchasing the old building required almost everything I had. I used profits from Nina's kitchen, secured a commercial loan, and negotiated for weeks with the bank. Alina supported the expansion, though she made me promise I was buying the property for business reasons, not to heal an old wound. I can't promise the wound has nothing to do with it, I said, but the numbers work. They did. The location was strong. The kitchen could be restored. The upstairs offices could become private dining rooms. Most importantly, the purchase would be mine, documented in contracts no one could reinterpret later. The bank accepted my offer on a rainy Tuesday morning. Dad came to Nina's kitchen that afternoon. He did not ask for a table. He walked directly into the dining room, his face red with anger. "How could you?" he demanded. Customers turned to look. Alina moved toward us, but I lifted one hand. I could handle this. Dad pointed across the street at the dark building. "We lost the family restaurant, and you bought it from the bank like a stranger. You did lose it." His mouth tightened. "Because you abandoned us." "No, because you gave it to Paul. You knew he couldn't manage it." "Yes, so did you." The truth stopped him for a moment. I continued, quietly enough that he had to listen. "You gave him the business because he needed stability. You brought me home because I was useful. Then you expected me to protect him from the consequences forever. That building was your grandfather's life. And you transferred it without telling me. I was trying to keep it in the family. You almost let it leave the family permanently." Dad looked older than he had 1 year earlier. For a second, I wanted to reach for him. Love does not vanish simply because trust does. But love was no longer going to make me surrender reality. He said, "You should give Paul a role in the new restaurant." I closed my eyes briefly. Even now, even after bankruptcy, humiliation, and foreclosure, my father's first instinct was to place Paul inside something I had saved. "No. He is your brother. And I am your daughter." Dad stared at me. I pointed across the street. "You asked how I could let the family lose the restaurant. I didn't. I just bought the building." His face went still. "The difference," I said, "is that this time my name is on the deed."